Okay, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. Webair presenting Microsoft Office 365, Is Your Data Really Safe? Powered by Veeam. My name is Gerard Hiner. I'm the Chief Business Officer at Webair, and I'm joined today by my colleague and CTO, Sagi Brody. Just a little bit about Webair. Webair is a managed IT cloud infrastructure provider. We provide secure, agile, and reliable managed cloud-based infrastructure solutions, leveraging our highly secure enterprise-grade network of global data centers. We have a global footprint, as you can see. We're headquartered here in New York, where we're speaking to you from today. We're also in Chicago, Los Angeles, Montreal, London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Singapore. Here you can see some of the mentions that we've been in as far as from Gartner and IDC, noted for the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Disaster Recovery as a Service, the notable vendor for 2017, 2018, and 2019. IT resiliency orchestration, managed hybrid cloud hosting, and more. With that, I'm going to hand over the controls to Sagi Brody, who's going to begin the rest of the webinar.
Thanks, Gerard. Good afternoon, everyone. And I thought we'd start with a simple screenshot from Microsoft's website to sort of drive home the point of the webinar. And clearly from their website, they talk about Office 365. We see here in the red, they say with Office 365, it's your data, you own it, you control it. And it's very important to keep that in mind. Office 365 is a do-it-yourself platform. It's a set of tools that allow you to accomplish your goals in relation to your organization's email. Microsoft does not want to ingest or look in your data or take ownership for what data is kept, deleted, preserved, or any of that. It's a set of tools. It's like walking into Home Depot. They're giving you all the components you need. It's up to you how you manage that and control that. And what that means is that there is shared responsibility. People make a lot of assumptions that if you're using a cloud-based service like Office 365, that the provider is going to take ownership of resilience and security and backups and best practices. And I think the industry is now coming to terms with the fact that it's not true. Just because I use a SaaS platform does not mean that I am not responsible for anything. So with Office 365, this diagram is really showing what's in your hands to be responsible for and what they're controlling. The most important thing, and I think the area where there's the most confusion, is around resilience of their platform. What does that mean? It means that Microsoft is certainly using multiple physical data centers in multiple locations to run Office 365. Your data is sitting in multiple locations. And so they have a high availability configuration, and they have a disaster recovery configuration, meaning if one of those data centers goes down or crashes or whatever, the service will live on, and hopefully there is no effect to your email. But keep in mind the data that's sitting in all those regions, it's the same data. If you modify a file on Office 365, that modification is immediately gonna make its way through all the different regions. It's not like one is older than the other. So the fact that there's resiliency in the infrastructure doesn't really help us from a backup and data assurance perspective.
So Sagi, they're clearly saying it's a high availability model, but it's not a protected model.
Correct. They're ensuring that the platform doesn't go down, that when you hit check for new mail, that it's not going to throw out an error message. That's what availability, high availability, and resilience refers to. It has nothing to do with backups. It's about uptime. The other components that they include from a technology perspective is related to backups is the recycling bin. And you know, I hate having to explain what a recycling bin is. I think it's all pretty apparent, but they're going to preserve data in the recycling bin, meaning you delete something, it's sitting in the recycling bin for a certain period of time, and then it's gone forever. So they'll give you assurance. That is, when it's in the recycling bin, it's recoverable for a certain period of time. And from a security perspective,
Is that period of time clearly defined?
If you do a bunch of digging, it is. I'll show you what that is on the next slide. I think for people, it's another area where people make bad assumptions. If I delete it, of course I should be able to go back and restore it. It's the cloud, isn't it? But so there's a lot of confusion there, which we'll look at in a sec. And also think of this shared responsibility from the security and compliance mode. People will say, well, of course my Office 365 is secure. I use Microsoft. Or of course my email is secure or compliant because I use a cloud. Well, no, they're going to secure the infrastructure. They're going to make sure that no one is able to break into a physical data center and steal a physical disk. They're going to make sure that their back-end management networks and their back-end management employees are secure. They're going to make sure that the infrastructure itself is compliant. But that has nothing to do with your company's compliance regarding email. It has nothing to do with the fact to say that if your email is secure or not, if a malicious attacker can get into someone's mailbox. That's all within your control, and that's all based upon how you configure the tool set and other third-party tools or providers that you might bring in to help manage those aspects. So, Gerard, to answer your question, here we can clearly see that by default, Microsoft has these retention policies, which basically just stipulate how long data will sit in a certain part of Office 365 before it's moved to another part, typically the slower archive tier, and how long before it's deleted forever. So by default, if anything in the recycling bin will disappear permanently forever after 30 days. Same thing for SharePoint and OneDrive after 90 days. Data will move from the inbox to an archive tier after a few years. And again, this is all related to at what point will data be permanently deleted forever if you don't do anything about it. This is not giving us any sort of restore capability, but this is just showing us when things disappear. So to kind of put that into perspective, here's a nice little tidbit. The average length of time that it takes someone to discover that data has been compromised is over 140 days. So you might have had a malicious attacker that was able to, let's say, to read some critical data and use that critical data for an attack, and then you finally discovered. Now you want to go back and see, well, what email was it that they were able to read that had that information? If you want to go back in time and do forensic analysis, and the forensic analysis requires you looking at emails that have been since moved to the recycling bin, which has been since deleted forever, you can't do that. To do a proper forensic analysis, you really need to be able to go back in time and look at what your data looked like exactly a month ago, 2 months ago, a year ago. What was the folder structure? What emails were unread, read? What was sitting in your inbox? What was in your other folders? And so oftentimes, when people realize that there's a breach, it's far beyond the length of time that they're preserving the information for. And so if you do nothing with Office 365 from a backup perspective, that will be the case for the average amount of time it takes to find a breach.
So most businesses, I would think, believe they are inherently protected because they're using Office 365 or their cloud-based services from Microsoft. But according to this, I mean, as it says, most people, by the time they realize there's something wrong, it's already too late.
Yeah, but this is the point where they're realizing, Office 365 does not include backups. And let's also define what challenges exist with what they're doing and where there are exposure and where there needs to be help. So Microsoft doesn't want to be in the business of stipulating, hey, why don't we keep your data for this period of time? Or why don't we perform restores? They're just, again, it's a set of tools. They are moving data to an archive, but it's not a backup. And so in order to be a legitimate backup capability, you have to think of backups in the traditional sense, just like you would do backups of your local computer, your local servers. It's not. It's the restore capability that where really the power lies. You want to be able to restore your server or your desktop or whatever and make it look like exactly how it did the day that the backup took place. You want to be able to, just like with OS X, with Time Machine, you want to hit the rewind button and say, revert this piece of infrastructure exactly how it looked like 5 days ago, a week ago, 2 years ago. And for Office 365, that means restoring the mailbox structure, restoring what emails were where at that point in time, and the same thing for OneDrive and SharePoint. The file structure, the SharePoint sites, all need to be able to go back and look like as they did on the day that the backup was taken. So Microsoft's archiving ability has nothing to do with that. That's just moving data that you don't touch a lot to another tier.
So that's actually important to note what you said. Treat it like traditional backup services.
Yeah.
You know, and if you think about it, you want to know, one, is my data protected? Do you actually have the data? And two, what does that restore process look like?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's just because it's SaaS. I mean, yeah, go back to that original backup and restore simple capability. So again, as we mentioned before, the fact that they're replicating your data to multiple regions has nothing to do with backups, because the second data is changed, that change is replicated globally. There is a litigation hold where you can go in and say, hey, hold this data, so it's not changed. It doesn't help you if you want to restore an entire mailbox to what it looked like on a certain day or time. That's just locking down data. So again, it might be it's a capability, but it's certainly not a backup and restore function as we would consider in the traditional sense. So obviously we're Webair, we're here to talk about our Office 365 capability. We do use Veeam on the back end because it has great integrations with Office 365. It makes our lives as a managed provider much easier. And what we're really here to do is to really give you the control to stipulate exactly what backup policy you want to impose on your organization for mailboxes, SharePoint, and OneDrive. It is a backup capability. It's not the archive. And we're actually storing the data outside of Microsoft, right? So regardless of what you may or may not think about Microsoft's inherent built-in data preservation capabilities, ultimately it's still stored in Office 365, and most auditors are going to say, how can you back up a platform in the same platform the production's running? So we're storing the data outside of Microsoft's infrastructure on our own physical backup servers located globally, and we're giving you that sort of offline capability. So Gerard, a minute ago, you basically said that you mentioned that a lot of organizations just don't realize that they're not protected. So this graph here really helps drive that home. When organizations were polled and asked, how are you protecting Office 365? Almost 20% said they're relying on Microsoft's built-in backup capability, which it has none. And so the 20% right off the bat are just misinformed and extremely exposed to problems. 55% said they're just not backing it up, and I would venture to say that they're answering that way because they think that they're relying on Microsoft's capability. So if you look at that here, there's essentially 75% of businesses that are relying on Office 365 are not protected.
Would you say it's fair to say too that the reason a lot of these companies are not protected is, one, they do think they are covered naturally, and two, they don't really know the tools available to back up O365 today?
Yeah, there's just a lot of misinformation. You know, if you're running OS X, you know to use Time Machine. If you're running traditional Windows servers, you go to those hardened backup vendors. When people go to the cloud, they think that something magical is happening, but it's just not the case. Yes, again, resilience. Data is stored in multiple locations, multiple data centers. It has nothing to do with restore capability, to hit the rewind button to make it look like what it looked like a week ago. So why do we need the backups? And yes, it's the same reasons why we need the traditional backup capability. Human error, accidental deletion, very common. It's still very common, especially with email. I think we're all hitting that delete button all day long without thinking. You need it because your organization is going to come up with sort of a global compliance and retention policy for data, and email is not going to be a carve out. Obviously, most companies still heavily rely upon email, and that's where a lot of critical information data is kept. Security threats. So there are malware viruses in the wild right now that get into people's desktops just for the purposes of getting into their Office 365 environment, deleting files, infecting files, redistributing malware, and all that. So how do you recover from something like that? How do you restore? Legal compliance, we mentioned before, and this is also a component of your hybrid backup capability. If you want to be able to protect your production environment, and the definition of part of your production environment includes SaaS and Office 365, you need to be able to impose your organization's resilience and backup requirements for all the platforms. You cannot have a one-off. So when the same organizations were polled and they asked what forms of data loss they experience in the cloud, not on-prem, not on servers, but with SaaS specifically, SaaS offerings, and not public cloud or infrastructure as a service, just SaaS, a good amount of people had events. And so over 50% had user error accidental deletions, 30% security threats, 30% retention gaps. So these are legitimate events that are occurring with SaaS products, Office 365. Other examples might be Salesforce or Workday. Again, those are also not, those are also susceptible to the same things. So, there are solutions out there to protect. Webair is not the only vendor who provides Office 365 backups as a service. There are other vendors. There's also software that you can buy. This is our offering, and we'll talk a little bit later about why we think Webair is a good fit for specific types of organizations for Office 365 backups. But essentially what we're offering is a bolt-on as a service to protect your Office 365 environment. It's billed on a per user per month basis. It's going to be inclusive of your mailboxes, your OneDrive, and your SharePoint. And essentially we allow the end user to control the backup policy. You can specify specific groups within your organization, specific users, and build policies for them. So you could say, hey, my C-level suite, I'd like to back up their data every 3 hours. And I'd like to retain those granular backups for 7 years. For my techs or my other departments, maybe daily and retained for 2 years. So you can build granular policy around different components of your organization using our service. It's a fully managed and monitored service. So we'll help you build those policies. We'll provide you with the tools to manage it yourself from the portal, or you can call us and have us walk you through the setup process, help you with the restores. Really, just outsource the entire headache and problem of Office 365 backups to us. We include compliance for the service, so this is all backed by business associate agreements for our healthcare customers. It's encrypted at rest, and we will hit all the compliance requirements typically for federal government, local state government, healthcare, ITAR, as well as other common requirements. This is storage that Webair owns and operates globally, and so we provide Office 365 backup targets at multiple locations in the United States, Canada, multiple sites in Europe and Asia, and provide you with assurance that if you have data sovereignty requirements, if your mailboxes that are in France have to stay in France, we will ensure that they don't leave the country. We also have private connectivity to Microsoft's backbone, and so if you go on Microsoft's website and you go to the Azure Express Route partner page, you'll see Webair is listed there, maybe one of 20 or 30 vendors in the world. And why that's important is that we use our high-speed links to back up your data faster privately and not over the public internet. So here's some simple screenshots just to show you what it looks like. Once you subscribe to the service, very easy sign-up process, you can go into our portal and you can build those policies. You can build there's no limit on the amount of policies you can build. And for each policy, you can attach the policy to an Office 365 user group. And you can build, again, how often to back up and how long to retain for and what components to back up. The mailboxes, the SharePoint, the OneDrive. From our portal, you can see the last time it was backed up, the next time it's stipulated to run as well.
So it really does allow you to get granular. It's not just a straight backup.
Yeah, Webair's mandate, so we really focus on taking over full accountability and full management for the services that we provide. White glove, not nickel and diming and charging for sort of hours. But we also strongly believe that for users that want self-service and want to go in and see what's going on, those capabilities are paramount and must exist. And so we always provide both. Even though it's fully managed, you still have complete self-service capabilities. In fact, on this screen, we can see that you can download the File Explorer. So, great question is, how do I get my data back? Where does it go? How do I restore? So with our offering, you can natively restore the data right back into Office 365. You can export the data and download it locally, or for mailboxes, you can actually bring them into a local exchange service. So here you can see the various methods to perform the restores. For mailboxes, there is a web-based Explorer where you can actually browse through the snapshots. And so here you can select a specific day and time, go to that day and see exactly what your emails and mailboxes look like on that day and time. Actually browse the mailbox, go back in time just like Time Machine, and from there perform the restores. And Office 365 backups, it's that's obviously the point of this webinar, but Webair strongly believes in business resilience, and the reason we have the Office 365 backup offering is because part of our mandate is to provide resilience for organizations' critical infrastructure. And as I said before, as the definition of what your critical production environment changes from sort of like an on-prem to a hybrid scenario, we want to be that partner that can provide you with resilience of all your production infrastructure. So on-premises servers, public cloud, virtual servers, desktops, and SaaS platforms. But going a step deeper, you really have to think about cloud in general and SaaS from a business resilience perspective. And business resilience is not just about IT infrastructure. It talks about the culture of the organization, the people. Do you have exposure? Is just one person who knows how to manage aspects of IT? And so before you actually go out and make a decision to even use something like Office 365, you have to weigh it against your business resilience requirements. I think today a lot of people are playing catch up. Different business units went out there and started subscribing to SaaS and using SaaS, and now IT is trying to catch up and say, how do we apply our organization's security requirements and compliance requirements for all these random products and services that people have subscribed to? So we're kind of in the mindset to take a step back and figure out what your business resilience requirements are before you purchase.
So we know the abilities and the shortcomings of Office 365 now. What would you recommend if you were consulting someone today?
Well, I would say that don't treat it any different than other aspects of your infrastructure. If you have a requirement to retain data for 3 years for critical infrastructure, you have to impose the same thing to Office 365. The next thing, and we'll talk about it in a minute, is what do you want to be accountable for versus what do you want to outsource? Would you like to manage? So the infrastructure required to back up Office 365, you can do it yourself. You can buy Veeam and run it yourself locally, but is that the business you want to be in? And do you want someone in your organization to be accountable to ensure it's running properly? Would you rather consume it as a service, which is essentially not buying infrastructure? You're buying an SLA, you're buying performance, you're buying legal liability from a third party. So that's really the second thing I would ask myself is what do I want to be accountable for? What's my appetite for risk? And it's really an arms race as organizations are going towards hybrid, which most organizations are. How do you keep up with that? How do you keep up with the internal group that can manage backups and resilience for all these different platforms everywhere? It's becoming increasingly complex. And so, as I said before, do you want to take ownership of all the hardware and software to back all this up? People go to Office 365 to get out of the accountability and ownership business and out of the hardware and software business. And so Do you want to go backwards and do it yourself and take ownership of the management, monitoring, and the encryption and the data sovereignty, all that? Would you rather consume it as a service and just buy the SLA? So this is a conversation. These are questions not just for Office 365, but for your infrastructure in general, your backups in general, your disaster recovery in general. That's Webair's business. The Office 365 backup, as I said before, is a small part of a much larger complete backup service.
It's not just a backup discussion, like you're saying. It's really a business decision and a business discussion that has to be made from a corporate standpoint.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, what do you do if you have one person accountable for backups and something is lost because they hit the wrong button or misinformed? Maybe you let that person go, maybe, but you still don't have your data. Wouldn't you rather have a contract and legal and credit remedies around it? And that's a great segue for Webair's backup as a service. So again, Office 365 is one platform that we back up. And again, our mantra was, wherever your critical data is, we'll back it up. And so as our customers started adopting Office 365, they were coming to us and saying, hey, we rely upon you, Webair, for full accountability and full ownership for our backups. And now critical data is in Office, so we want you to own it. So in addition to Office 365, our backups as a service also covers on-premises or co-located VMware, Hyper-V, physical Linux, Windows servers, IBM iSeries, P-Series as well. And so again, we'll back up all that. We'll back up your NAS data, your object data. We charge for our backups as a service on a simple storage usage model. How much data is being backed up? We're not charging for operations or gets or puts or restores. If you don't already own the data mover, which we recommend Veeam for backups, we will provide that as part of the service too. It's all fully managed. Webair monitors the backup jobs. If the jobs fail, we'll notify you. If your local configuration is running out of storage, we'll let you know. And it's full management accountability from us as a third party. Here are some of the portals relating to, here are some screenshots related to the non-Office 365 components of the portal. And we also have a big focus on security and compliance. So we end up working with a lot of enterprise organizations where their infrastructure is not cookie cutter. It's Office, it's the VMware, it's the physical boxes, it's legacy platforms. And so those types of organizations require a lot of customization from a network integration perspective and a sort of breadth of platforms, but also from a security and compliance perspective. So Webair's SSA 18 SOC 2 Type 2 audits actually are inclusive of other frameworks, and they demonstrate how we comply with frameworks for CGIS, DFS, HIPAA, FISMA, ITAR, GDPR, and now FDA. And so it makes it very easy. You as an enterprise organization, you can literally just copy and paste from our SOC audits and say, this is what Webair, as our fully managed backup and resilience provider, takes ownership and accountability for. And again, the overarching theme is, yes, we're providing infrastructure, backups, network, but it's full management, it's SLA, it's response time, it's customized monitoring, it's customized teams, it's really trust. And to take it even a step further, beyond the backups as a service, we also provide disaster recovery as a service using the same data movers, using the same integrations. And if you think that backups and DR are the same, I'd invite you to look at some of our other webinars. We really talk about what are the differences, when can I group backups and DR together, and when are they completely different. So Webair's disaster recovery as a service model provides the entire DR infrastructure. We will replicate your critical components to us as a service on a per server per month basis, and we will own the failover process, the failback process. We'll own the onboarding, the run book. We'll allow you to use the infrastructure for 3 days out of every month for free, so you can do as many self-service DR tests as you like. We'll actually perform a managed DR test with you quarterly. And it's a fully managed service. It's strictly based on how much is being replicated. We're not charging you for compute or disk or memory or network. There's no gotchas, simple price model. And here's an example of just one of our customers, publicly traded pharmaceuticals company. And again, it's it's a very hybrid environment. There's Office 365 backups. There's a few hundred VMs. There's also, there's IBM, all these different platforms, and so MPLS integration, and so interesting sample use. So our advice is really just to really take a temperature for your internal infrastructure and for your platforms, and say, how is this critical data being protected? Do I need the infrastructure to come up during a disaster, or am I just looking for offsite backups? Who do I want to be accountable to ensure that things are running properly? Is it my IT team? Do I want to work with a company like Webair who will provide it as a service? And really prioritize based on application criticality and attack the most important applications first. We oftentimes work with our customers in that way, where we'll focus on a phase 1 deployment and maybe look at just our entire building is down and we need a full site DR capability first, and then we'll get more iterative and focus on application failover after that. So that concludes what we had to present today. Gerard?
Thank you very much, Sagi. It was very insightful. And thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar today. And just a reminder that since you attended this webinar, you're eligible for a free 30-day trial of Office 365 backups with Webair. And if you have any questions about the webinar, you can reach out to us via email at webinars@webair.com, or you can always give us a call at 1-866-WEBAIR1. That's 1-866-932-2471. Thank you again.